Darth Vader's suit was specifically designed terribly by Emperor Palpatine as a way to constantly torture him, to punish him forever for his failure to kill Obi-Wan on Mustafar. The suit served as a constant reminder of who Anakin had now become. Vader didn't know this though. He thought the droids were in the medical facility was just incompetent. It made Vader angry, made him feel constant pain, pushed him forever further down the dark path. And the way he describes it is quite horrific to imagine. He describes his breathing, his walking, his force abilities, how he eats, how he uses the bathroom, everything. Vader describes it, and it is truly horrific. And, keep watching, don't leave. I mean, it's still an entertaining video, I promise. That's what we're going to go over today in the book Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, as we see Vader 4 weeks after getting his suit. He's not used to any of it, and he's thinking about it all together for what seems like the first time. So let's go over exactly how Vader describes his suit when thinking about getting up and walking, eating, breathing, everything that you would need to do. As a regular human, he just cannot do anymore. So we're going to go through it once again. Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. Vader turned and moved for the hatch. But this is not walking, he thought. Long accustomed to building and rebuilding droids, supercharging the engines of land speeders and starfighters, upgrade the mechanisms that controlled the first of his artificial limbs, he was dismayed by the incompetence of the medical droids responsible for his resurrection in Sidious's lofty laboratory on Coruscant. His alloy lower legs were bulked by strips of armor similar to those that filled and gave form to the long glove Anakin had worn over his right arm prosthesis. What remained of his real limbs ended in bulbs of grafted flesh inserted into machines that triggered movement through the use of modules that interfaced with his damaged nerve endings. But instead of using durasteel, the medical droids had substituted an inferior alloy and had failed to inspect the strips that protected the electromotive lines. As a result, the inner lining of this pressurized bodysuit was continually snagging on places where the strips were anchored to knee and ankle joints. The tall boots were a poor fit for his artificial feet, whose claw-like toes lacked the electrostatic sensitivity, and his equal false fingertips. Raised in the heel, the cumbersome footgear canted him slightly forward, forcing him to move with exaggerated caution, lest he stumble or topple over. Worse, they were so heavy that he often felt rooted to the ground, as if he were moving in high gravity. What good was motion of this sort if he was going to have to call on the Force, even to walk just from place to place? He may as well have resigned himself to using a repulsor chair and abandoned any hope of movement. The defects in his prosthetic arms mirrored those of his legs. Only the right one felt natural to him, though it too was artificial, and the pneumatic mechanisms that supplied articulation and support were sometimes way too slow to respond. The weighty cloak, the pectoral plating, so restricted his movement that he could scarcely lift his arms over his head, and he'd already been forced to adapt his lightsaber technique just to compensate. He could probably adjust the servo drivers and the pistons in his forearms to provide his hands with strength enough to crush the hilt of his new lightsaber. With the power of his arms alone, he had the ability to lift an adult being off the ground, but the Force had always given him the ability to do that, especially in moments of rage, as he had shown on Tatooine and elsewhere. What's more, the sleeves of the bodysuit didn't hug the prosthesis as they should, and the elbow-length gloves sagged and bunched at the wrists. Gazing at the gloves now, Vader thought, this is not seeing. The pressurized mask was goggle-eyed, fish-mouthed, short-snouted, and needlessly angular over the cheekbones. Coupled with a flaring dome of helmet, the mask gave him the forbidding appearance of an ancient Sith war droid. The dark hemispheres that covered his eyes filtered out light that might have caused further injury to his damaged corneas and retinas, and prevented him from being able to see the toes of his boots without inclining his head almost 90 degrees. Listening to the servo motors that drove his limbs, he thought, and this is not hearing. The Medroids rebuilt the cartilage of his outer ears, but his eardrums, having melted completely in Mustafar's heat, had been beyond repair. Sound waves now had to be transmitted directly to implants in his inner ear, and sounds registered as if issuing from underwater. Worse, the implanted sensors lacked sufficient discrimination so that too many ambient sounds were picked up, and their distance and direction were too difficult to determine. Sometimes, the sensors needled him with feedback or attached echo or vibrato effects, or even the faintest noise, allowing his lungs to fill with air, Vader thought. And this is not breathing. Here, the Medroids had truly failed him. From a control box he wore strapped to his chest, a thick cable entered his torso, linked to a breathing apparatus and heartbeat regulator. The ventilator was implanted in his hideously scarred chest, along with tubes that ran directly into his damaged lungs, and others that entered his throat, so that, should the chest plate or belt control panels develop a glitch, he could breathe unassisted for a limited time. But the monitoring panel beeped frequently and for no apparent reason, and the constellation of lights served only as a steady reminder of his vulnerability. The incessant rasp of his breathing interfered with his ability to rest, let alone sleep. And sleep, in the rare moments it came to him, was a nightmarish jumble of twisted, recurrent memories that unfolded to excruciating sounds. The Medroids had at least inserted the redundant breathing tubes low enough so that with the aid of an enunciator, Vader's scorched vocal cords could still form sounds and words. But absent the enunciator, which imparted a synthetic bass tone, his own voice was little more than a whisper. He could take food through his mouth as well, but only when he was inside a hyperbaric chamber, since he had to remove the triangular respirator vent that was the mask's prominent feature. So it was easier to receive nourishment through liquids, intravenous and otherwise, and to rely on catheters, collection pouches, and recyclers to deal with liquid and solid waste. But all those devices made it even more difficult for him to move with ease, much less with any grace. The pectoral armor that protected his artificial lung weighed him down, as did the electrode-studded collar that supported the outsize helmet, necessary to safeguard these cybernetic devices that replaced the uppermost of his vertebrae, the delicate systems of the mask, and the ragged scars in his hairless head. The syntheskin that substituted for what was scarred from his bones itched incessantly, and his body needed to be periodically cleansed and scrubbed of necrotic flesh. Already, he'd experienced moments of claustrophobia, moments of desperation to just be rid of the suit, to emerge from its shell. He needed to build, or have built, a chamber in which he could feel human again, if at all possible. All in all, Vader thought, this is not living. This was solitary confinement, prison of the worst sort, continual torture. He was nothing more than wreckage, power without purpose. A melancholy sigh escaped the mouth grill. Collecting himself, Vader stepped through the hatch. So that's Vader describing his suit as a prison of the worst sort. He can barely move. He can't sleep without having nightmares. He can't eat without it being from tubes. He can't breathe without it just paining him. And he needs the whole thing beeping and flashing. He can't go to the freaking bathroom. His eardrums were completely burned out and rebuilt. His eyes barely work without the light damaging him even more. His skin has to be scrubbed off because it's just gross and falling off. He can barely feel the Force. It's no wonder Vader is so angry all the time. It's a horrible living condition, the claustrophobia, the torture, and he doesn't know that Sidious did this all on purpose. It's crazy, man. Let me know what you think. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I wanted to make my own video on it. I hadn't talked about it before, so again, let me know what you think. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate the support, appreciate it all, and I'll see you in the next video.